this week. I didn't bring it.
Your turn.
You didn't have to bring that up. You know that.
Oh, me and Miss Pat don't have to
Have you
talk.
got me in trouble? Whew. Well, Pat and I celebrated our 70th wedding anniversary.
Wow.
70 years.
What we said. It just got here quicker than we thought it would.
That is amazing.
That is
70 years, that's a long time.
They were 12 when they got married.
Not too far off.
How old were you when you got married?
Yeah, I was gonna.
I was 18, she was 17.
18 and 17.
Wow.
We laugh about a lot of things, but as we look back over the years, we realize that a lot of things have changed since we married. And I am amazed at the technological advances that have occurred in just the last few years, but you can't imagine how different it is today when we think about when we were first married. You were shocked at our age, but when I was 16, I graduated from high school, and my father come to me and said, "Son, I can't help you in college. You need to go find you a job." So at age 16, I went off to Dallas Brown Light, took a job, and I stayed 43 and a half years. And by the way, my father also had a caveat at the end: you need to find a job. He said, "Son, you can continue to live at home if you want to, but you will have to pay room and board." So at age 16, I was off on my own. At the same time, Pat's mother and father had ended their marriage, and she was working to help her mother cover the cost of rent and food. And so it was really just the next logical thing for us to go ahead and get married, and we did. My early years were not pleasant years in terms of how I conducted my life. I was born and raised in a church, and yet in my teenage years, my life was not being lived at all for the Lord. In fact, if you were to look around my face here, you'd find some cuts and things that were caused by fights. And I did not get along very well with some people. And so the Lord began to check on me pretty close, and when we had our first child, Pat's sister's son, age 6, died of bulbar polio, and our son had spent the day with him just before he died. And there were 2 other little boys, and those 2 other little boys took polio too, and our son didn't. And the Lord really got a hold of me about that time and began to speak very loudly to me about what kind of a life I was living. And so thank the Lord again, as I've told you about my dear friend Jack Lord, who was the pastor that came and irritated me to no end. But it was at an early age that Pat and I then decided that we really needed to put the Lord first in our lives. And it's been a wonderful 70 years, let me tell you. 6 kids, 18 grandchildren, and we've just been told that we're having in April our 24th great-grandchild.
Great-grandchild.
Yeah. So we've been so thankful to the Lord for what He's done. Now, let me hear from you guys. What's been going on in your life? We've been apart for a little while.
Hold on, I got another question.
Oh, okay.
How'd you meet your wife?
We went to high school together.
And how'd you manage to get her involved with you?
Met her, she was on a date with another fella on a hayride.
Here it comes.
Then they got in a fight. That's the truth.
And
Well, that was one of those fights he's talking about.
no, he happened to be my best friend.
Oh!
I'm one start taking notes on his.
Keep
But
going.
I was dating another young lady when the young lady who knew my wife very well told her that she was going to break up with me. I didn't know it. She told Pat.
Oh, okay.
And so it just seemed like we had all the right reasons to have a date.
How did your best friend feel about all
Yeah,
that?
did you lose your best?
Oh, he was already looking at another young
Oh,
lady.
okay, all right. It's all good.
That young lady happened to be the daughter of the man that owned all the land where LBJ Freeway and Town East Shopping Center is, J.B. Galloway. J.B. Galloway in Mesquite, Texas, owned everything. And my friend ended up marrying his daughter, and recently both of them have passed away. One of the things that you realize when you get to be our age is that you're losing a lot of your friends.
Yeah.
I'm serious.
Yeah.
And it's not because they're unfriendly anymore. It's just they've gone home to be with the Lord or elsewhere. But let me just encourage you. Enjoy the time you have together, husband and wife. I'm serious. It will go by before you can blink an eye. And I look at y'all, and you just don't know how much I enjoy just watching you and your families, and what a joy you bring to Pat and I in our lives. We have too many kids to get them in our house anymore, and we had planned a celebration over at Willowbrook Country Club for our wedding anniversary, but due to the pandemic, we decided that we would wait to do it some other time. But all of our kids have made sure that we understood that we were not forgotten during that period of time. So thank you again. Hey, let's turn to Joshua chapter 20 and put a marker there, and then I want you to turn back to Numbers chapter 35 and verse 6, if you will. As we get started this morning, we're ending up the book of Joshua pretty quick. The latter chapters of the book of Joshua have to do with the division of the land among the 12 tribes of Israel. Now, this is a period of time that Israel has been looking forward to for many, many years. Now, let's get a hold of it and really understand what we're talking about. 40 years the children of Israel wandered in the wilderness because they did not believe God. These 40 years, plus the time now that it took for them to go in and conquer the land, is the time that has elapsed since Moses renewed or reviewed the law with the children of Israel. Just before the nation Israel crossed over the river Jordan and into the land, Deuteronomy is the book in the Bible that is the second giving of the law. 40 years had gone by since they started their wandering in the land. Those 40 years, it apparently seemed that the law was not primary in the nation Israel's mind. So right at the beginning of the entry into the land, just before Moses was set aside and Joshua was announced as the leader of the land, Moses went back over the law and reminded the children of Israel of what the law had to say. Many things that are going to be carried out in these last few chapters of the book of Joshua were things that God had instructed them to do some 50 years before they started doing it. For a moment or two, let's move back to Numbers chapter 35, because this is 50 years before the time that we read about in Joshua chapter 20. And there's some instructions here that have not been forgotten. And it says, "And the Lord spoke unto Moses in the plains of Moab by the Jordan near Jericho, saying, Command the children of Israel that they give unto the Levites of the inheritance of their possession cities to dwell in, and you shall give also unto the Levites pasture lands for the cities round about them. And the cities shall have to dwell, and the cities shall they have to dwell in, and the environment or environs of them shall be for their cattle and for their goods and for all their beasts." Now this is 50 years before we read in Joshua that this was going to be carried out. Now God said, for the Levites, you will not receive an inheritance of your own. How many children did Joseph have?
2.
2. That's right. There were 12 children of Jacob, his 12 sons. Now, the Levites were not to receive an inheritance. Joseph is dead, and Joseph himself did not receive an inheritance, but his 2 children, his 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, one received Joseph's inheritance, and one received the Levites' inheritance. Now, God did not intend for the Levites to be left out. What was special about the Levites? What was their role in the family? And they're now the nation.
Priests.
Priest, and they carried the ark, right?
Okay? They were the priests. Now, they were the spiritual leaders. Through them, and they were then to be the governmental leaders also of the nation Israel. So now we find that what's going to happen to the Levites, and there's some very unusual points of view as we look at Joshua in just a moment. Let me go further with what we said. God said now to Moses, and Moses says to the people, all of the other 10 children of Jacob, and in Ephraim and Manasseh being the children of Joseph, you guys have received your inheritance. Now, out of your inheritance, you're going to give to the Levites certain cities. It turns out to be quite a number of cities. In fact, 42 plus 6, and the 6 are special cities. But not only were you to receive those cities, you're to receive some pasture land around those cities. And those cities were to be given freely by the other 10 tribes, and the pasture land was to go with them for the animals of the Levites. Picking this on up again, and notice what it says. Here's how you're going to determine how much land they're to receive. Verse 4. And the pasture land of the cities which ye shall give unto the Levites shall reach from the wall of the city and outward 1,000 cubits round about. Now, in general terms, a cubit is 18 inches. So, quickly, Dean, how far out would their
1,000?
1,000 cubits?
Okay, so 18,000. 180,000
1,500 feet.
a mile.
Keep on, you're gonna get there.
No, so 1,500 feet is a quarter mile.
Okay, about a quarter of a mile out, and it was to reach around the city, so they would have grazing lands for their cattle. And you shall measure from the outside the city on the east side 2,000 cubits, on the north side 2,000 cubits, and on the west side 2,000, and the north side 2,000 cubits, and the city shall be in the midst. This shall be to them the pasture lands of the cities. Why is it important for God to put this into His Word for us today? Why is it important for us to look at these things? God wanted you and me to know all the things that have gone on. God doesn't want to keep secrets from us. Folks, He's not a secretive God. He lays out everything, and He tells us about what He did years ago for these people, but there were reasons He did all of this. These people, the Levites, were going to have their hands full handling the spiritual and governmental matters of the nation. They needed pasture lands to raise cattle on for their foods and such, but their job was something else, and they didn't have time to go out and build these cities and develop these pastures. So the people were to give unto the Levites these cities. And listen in verse 6, and among the cities which you shall give unto the Levites, there shall be 6 cities for refuge, which you shall assign for the manslayer, that he may flee there, and to them you shall add 42 cities. 6 of the 48 cities that God was giving the Levites were cities of refuge. The purpose of this is something that we have in our laws today, but I wanted to bring to your attention, as I told you a while ago, that for the 70 years that Pat and I have been married, things have changed. And I want you to look back with me at this point in time, how God had the nation Israel look at people who were involved with accidental deaths of others, who caused an accidental death. There's an ancient law that was given that says, if you shed man's blood by man, then your blood will be shed. But that doesn't take into consideration the things that can happen on an accidental basis with no intent for harm or hurt in any way. Accidents happen. And this morning what we're going to read in chapter 20 of the book of Joshua is the carrying out of this message that was given some 70 years before. And I want to quickly move through this and say this. Verse 11, then you shall appoint your cities to be cities of refuge for you, that the slayer who has accidentally caused the death of someone else, may flee there, who killeth any person unintentionally, and they shall be unto you cities for refuge from the avenger, that the manslayer die not until he stand before the congregation in judgment. And of these cities which you shall give, 6 cities shall ye have for refuge, and you shall give 3 cities on this side of the Jordan, and 3 cities you shall give in the land of Canaan, which shall be the cities of refuge. Though not particularly spoken of here, in checking with this issue, I find that it was intended in the way they set these cities up, that a person who had caused the death of the other could flee to one of these refuge cities in a half a day's journey from any place in the country. They were so strategically located that if you caused the death of someone from wherever you were, it took you about a half a day's journey to get to one of these cities of refuge. Now, you didn't get to go there and move into the city and have the protection on your own say-so. It was an unusual setup as far as I was concerned, as I read this and went over it this week. Let's go a little further. And it says here in verses 16, and if he smite him with an instrument of iron, meaning intentionally, so that he die, he is a murderer, and the murderer shall surely be put to death. And if he smite him with throwing a stone, wherewith he may die, intentionally throwing a stone and hitting the person, he is a murderer. The murderer shall surely be put to death. Or if he smite him with an hand weapon of wood, wherewith he may die, and he die, he is a murderer, and the murderer shall surely be put to death. Now the avenger of blood himself shall slay the murderer. When he meeteth him, he shall slay him. But if he thrust him from hatred, or hurl him by lying in wait that he die, or in enmity smite him with his hand that he die, he that smote him shall surely be put to death, for he is a murderer. The avenger of blood shall slay the murderer when he meeteth him. That's pretty straightforward, isn't it? Interesting thing, and John may know more about this than I do, but for years I kept up with various things in Dallas. And one of the things that showed up on the police records in Dallas, that the Jewish community had fewer young people involved in criminal activities than any other group, and there were very, very few young Jewish men and women that got into trouble, even in Dallas till a few years ago that I knew about. Because the families were very careful about teaching them things like this. They looked at death and accidental death different than we do. They looked at the immediacy of carrying out criminal justice. They didn't drag it out 12, 14 years. It was an immediate thing. Moving on quickly, it says this. Then the congregation, if I accidentally kill someone and I flee to the refuge city, then the congregation, it says, that is the group of people that live in that refuge city, shall judge between the slayer and the avenger of blood according to these ordinances. The congregation shall deliver the slayer out of the hand of the avenger of blood, and the congregation shall restore him to the city of his refuge, to which he was fled. And he shall abide in it until the death of the high priest, who was anointed with holy oil. For time's sake, let me move forward with this just a little bit and tell you. When the person involved in this accident flees to the city of refuge, he then goes before the council or the court of that city of refuge. He shares his story of how this matter happened. The avenger may be there almost with him because the avenger is on his way to kill him. And the court says, no, we're going to hear him first. And if the person involved in the situation shares with the congregation the truth, and they believe him, then he becomes a ward of the court, so to speak. He becomes under the care and guidance of that council, and they give him a dwelling place in that city. But now that city becomes his prison. He cannot leave the gate of that city. He cannot exit it. If he does, he is open game for the avenger. Now, how long does this man stay? Today, in our prison system, we award certain years in a prison, or we give them, there's a word that I've just missed, when they give him leniency and put him on probation. Then this city didn't have that opportunity. They took him in, and he was to stay there the rest of his life, or if he outlived the high priest of that day, then at the point the high priest dies, he has the right to return to his own city, his own village, and there pick up his life and live it out. However, if he dies before the high priest dies, his body is buried there at the city, and then when the high priest dies, his bones are picked up, carried back to his own inheritance where his family is buried, and his bones are then placed in that area. So the man had to consider, if he fled to the city of refuge, it was a lifetime sentence almost. Now this is based for accidental death. Now, think about it in terms of how we relate to things today. Today, if someone causes the death of another, and let me just pick a subject. let's talk about traffic accidents. Now, the reason I picked that is that this morning when I left the donut shop where I picked up the donuts, and I pulled off of the curb out into the drive lane, but there was a corner right behind me, and there was a car there, and I saw him sitting there, but when I pulled out from the curb, he turned the corner. And apparently he felt like I should have waited because in just a minute he was on the rear end of my car bouncing up and down, and in a little while, in a very unsafe manner, he flew around me and cut back in front to let me know I had done something wrong. Of course, right away, being the calm person I am, I thought about killing him. No, I did. The urge, I wanted to get up there and honk my horn. But in traffic accidents today, there are a lot of things that John can tell us about. If we had this kind of a law today, I don't think we'd be seeing near the number of people killed in accidents that we do, because there's responsibility here, major responsibility. The city of refuge reminds me of how much I need the refuge of the Lord Jesus Christ, because so many times I do things so wrong and I feel like I'm a fool. Have you ever thought about why you did something? You flew off the handle and you said, why did I do that? Well, the older I get, that's happening more, I'm sorry. But you wonder why you turned yourself loose, lost control of it. And if we lived back when we're reading about now with the land of Canaan, it would be different ways and different things, and we would be much more careful about what we do. I'm so thankful that God doesn't hold me to the accountability that He's done this. But let's go forward and let's look at some more things that He's talking about. Verse 26. If the slayer shall at any time come outside the border of the city of his refuge, to which he was fled, and the avenger of blood find him outside the borders of the city of his refuge, and the avenger of the blood kill the slayer, he shall not be guilty of blood. They didn't put guards on him to keep him in. It was his responsibility to stay within the confines of that city. If he went outside of it, he was free game for the avenger, because he should have remained in the city of his refuge until the death of the high priest. But after the death of the high priest, the slayer shall return into the land of his possession. So these things shall be for a statute of judgment unto you throughout your generations in all your dwellings. Now, if you will, let's turn to Joshua chapter 20. Now remember, we're turning now 50 years later. Now the division of the land has been complete, and I want to tell you something. Can you imagine dividing up the land so that there was no dispute among the people? I can't. Let me tell you how they divided it up. Joshua and the representative leader of each of the tribes and the high priest. So if there are 12 possessions, there were 12 men, one representing each of the tribes. Then Joshua and the high priest made 14 men. These 14 men sat in council and made the decisions concerning who received what portion and how big a portion that was going to be. And the thing that amazes me most, it was done to the satisfaction of all the people. There was no disputes about it. And I want to tell you that just blows my mind how could this really come off? It was because the people were listening to the Lord. And that's why I wanted you to go back and realize that a lot of things that we read in the book of Joshua were ordered back before they started their 40 years wandering in the wilderness. God laid out instructions for them, and now they're going to carry them out. These 14 men made the decisions concerning the amount and location of each of the inheritances. And let me remind you that this inheritance was the inheritance that was given to them from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. These promises go back hundreds of years, and God is faithful. If God is so careful to fulfill each of the promises, is it not comforting to us to stop and think about how God is going to be faithful to fulfill every promise He's made to you and to me? My God shall supply all of your needs according to His riches and glory. So wrote Peter in 1 Peter. What other promises can you think about that God has made that are really kind of special to you? Think about it. Give me some of your ideas about it. What are the promises that you remember that are special to you?
You mean individually or?
Either way,
biblically?
collectively or individually?
Well, I think the biggest promise is I get to go to the heaven, get to be with the Heavenly Father. That's the biggest promise, that all my sin now and the future is wiped away by the gift of His Son. That's the biggest one.
Yeah.
And accepting that grace.
Can you imagine sitting at the right hand of God the Father?
Oh.
You will be one big dog back then. You will have a special place. Each of you will. Each of us will. What are some of the other promises that you think about that mean something really strong to you? Yes, Mary Jo.
Well, He promises never to leave us or forsake us in any time of trouble when we don't see or feel Him. And
Oh, yes.
I have seen that time and again, and I've thought,
Yeah.
and I'm always amazed.
I will not forsake you nor leave you.
And I think, why am I amazed? This is His promise. He says He will. I was on a flight to go see my mother when she was dying, and our church at that time was in a bit of a split. And I was upset on the flight, and lo and behold, who's sitting right next to me but a minister of that same body sitting next to me and said, "Can I pray for you? You look distressed." And I thought, He knew. I mean, God put the person I needed on the flight next to me well ahead before I even knew my mom was in distress. He planned to comfort me when I needed comfort. And that's a promise. He makes a promise and then He carries it out. And go.
This, yeah.
I'm,
Wow. This is why God is so faithful to put this information in the Bible, because it strengthens us today too. We know who He is and how He operates, and He doesn't change. What else? What are some of your promises that are very special to you?
That He doesn't change.
He what?
That He doesn't change. That He is
Oh,
who
He
He
changes
says
not.
He is. He is trustworthy because of that. And He's
Does
faithful.
yours change?
Very little.
No comment.
No.
But he truly, that's one of the biggest things for me is when I am faithless and I'm not faithful and not obedient, He is still faithful. He does not change. So that's a huge one for me.
Yeah. How about you, the rest of you? Okay. We will move on to Joshua chapter 20. Now, remember, we're going to carry out what Moses told the people some 50 years before this. Verse 1, the Lord also spoke unto Joshua, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, saying, Assign you cities of refuge, of which I spoke unto you by the hand of Moses. And I won't read these verses again, but God tells Joshua the same things that Moses told the people back then. You're going to appoint some cities of refuge, and therefore the person who unintentionally and without malice has caused the death of someone else. And so it describes all of this, and then it closes out in verse 9. And these were the cities assigned for all the children of Israel, and for the stranger who sojourneth among them. This opportunity to avoid being killed was provided not only to the children of Israel, but also to the stranger or sojourner who was in the land. He also, or she also, could flee to the city of refuge. Now, God has planned for every situation. God is very just and very careful to cover every situation. There in these cities of refuge, this person who flew there, the refugee, if you please, had some benefits. He had God's servants, the Levites, there now to instruct him, to pray for him, to guide him and help improve himself or herself. While they were there in the city, they were the ward of the government. And so the idea that he came there to be free and totally live his life, no, that's not it. He lived in a very controlled situation, unable to leave the gates of the city, and always under the leadership of the Levites that were there. Now, a total of 48 cities were assigned to the Levites for their living. 6 of these cities were cities of refuge, not 5, not 4. They were 6 and 6 always. And now let's turn back to Numbers just for a minute to verse 8 of chapter 35. There's a point I wanted to make, and I'm sorry I didn't make it while we were here. Now, if I have received my inheritance, now the inheritances were already given out. Keep this in mind. Now, if Dean has got his inheritance, he's got it all out, lined out for him. But now God is going to ask Dean to give up some of his land and some of his cities and give them to the Levites. They were not given as an inheritance, but the Levites were to receive the cities from those who had received the inheritance. Verse 8, if you please. And the cities which you shall give shall be of the possession of the children of Israel. From those who have many you shall give many, but from those who have few you shall give few. Everyone shall give of his cities unto the Levites according to his inheritance which he inheriteth. So these were cities given from the pockets of the individual tribes. Nowhere in here do I read of any people who were upset or fussed about giving. They didn't. They were pleased to give. And I'm sorry I'm about to run out of time, but chapter 21 goes ahead and explains a little bit about this. But quickly turn with chapter 21 to verse 43 with me just for a moment. And the Lord gave unto Israel all the land which he swore to give unto their fathers, and they possessed it and dwelt in it. And the Lord gave them rest round about, according to all that he had sworn to their fathers. And there stood not a man of all their enemies before them. The Lord delivered all their enemies into their hand. Now this verse, you ought to underscore it and read it over and over again. There failed nothing of any good thing which the Lord had spoken to the house of Israel, all came to pass. Not one promise did God fail in. Not one thing did he overlook. Not one thing did he change his mind on. And it all fits what you just said. He's dependable. He changes not. He's there with something to answer your problem even before you think about it. This is the God that loves you. This is the God that calls you his child. This is the God that has promised one day you will sit at my right hand. And one day there'll be no more sickness. And I think of Emily's father. I think of Pat. I think of others. And I think of Dennis Crandon. By the way, y'all pray for Dennis. I don't know if y'all heard that he has now been diagnosed and the cancer has spread from the bladder to the liver to the lungs. And it's a very serious situation with Dennis. Pray for him. But God did not fail in any one thing. Praise be to his name. Let's have a word of prayer and close. Father, thank you for being our God. Thank you for being our Heavenly Father. Father, not on the basis of anything that we've done do we deserve this, but it's your grace and your mercy. Thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.